Welcome to the Horizon Audiofiles, a podcast of the Defense Horizon Journal. The Defense Horizon Journal is a professional and academic journal that features essays, reports, and analyses covering geopolitics and law, security and defense policy, peace and conflict studies, applied military science, as well as developments in weapons technology. For more information, go to www.tdhj.org.
Episode number 84. Strategic Autonomy in the Global South, Navigating a Fragmented World Order. By Kaustubh Tripathi. Introduction. Fragmentation, uncertainty, and the gradual erosion of the post-Cold War liberal order have become well-established markers of the contemporary international system. Rivalry between the United States and the People's Republic of China, PRC, also known as a great power rivalry, has reshaped global politics into a competitive, multipolar environment in which economic interdependence and geopolitical confrontation coexist. The Global South is thus presented with both opportunities and constraints by this evolving landscape. With the emergence of multiple power centers worldwide, many developing and middle-income countries have adopted strategic autonomy as a guiding principle for their foreign and strategic policies. Strategic autonomy is broadly understood as the capacity to make sovereign and independent foreign policy choices without succumbing to constraints, whether from internal or external pressures. It has emerged in response to systemic instability at the global political stage. It reflects an effort to diversify partnerships and expand the range of foreign policy choices by hedging against overdependence and retaining decisional flexibility in a fragmented world order. As great power competition intensifies and the global order fragments into competing political, economic, and security blocs, Global South states face a strategic dilemma: how to preserve sovereignty and national decision-making without becoming entangled in binding alliances or coercive dependencies. Although strategic autonomy is increasingly presented as the solution, there is insufficient policy-oriented analysis of how it is operationalized in different geopolitical contexts. Strategic autonomy in the Global South. Strategic autonomy as a concept is situated between alignment and isolation. It emphasizes policy independence, diversified strategic engagement, and contextual alignment. Scholars have framed it as a form of hedging behavior, in which states seek to mitigate risks arising from great power rivalry while maximizing economic and security benefits. Strategic autonomy in the Global South arose from the historical experiences of colonialism, Cold War bloc competition, and decolonization movements in the 20th century. It is in the latter's context that the non-aligned movement emerged, which provided a normative basis for strategic autonomy, which is relatively more flexible and less ideological. Today's strategic autonomy is exercised within a globalized system, where complete disengagement is neither feasible nor desirable. Strategic autonomy, as it stands today, is not a single-dimensional concept. It comprises foreign policy flexibility, defense procurements and military partnerships, economic diversification and supply chain resilience, and, lastly, technological and industrial capabilities. It becomes crucial for Global South states to balance these dimensions without provoking the existing dominant powers, so as to optimize their resources effectively and prevent any kind of containment arising from the insecurities of the existing powers, which they might perceive as a threat to their influence. Fragmented world order and strategic autonomy. The idea of a fragmented world order denotes the dilution of liberal norms and the politicization of global governance institutions with the emergence of parallel economic and security architectures. Trade wars, tariff issues, sanction regimes, and weaponized interdependence have narrowed the policy space for many states. Given such global dynamics, aligning with a single power center can prove to be a move that puts the states in a vulnerable position. Economic coercion, strategic abandonment, and/or diplomatic isolation could be its consequences. It is here that strategy autonomy comes to the rescue, mitigating risk by preserving maneuverability amid global disorder. It also acts as a tool for the Global South to help them resist marginalization at the global political level, which is dominated by industrialized economies. From non-alignment to multi-alignment, India's case of strategic autonomy. India has approached strategic autonomy in a conventional yet novel manner. The Indian conception of strategic autonomy is a very prominent case in contemporary international politics and foreign policy analysis. Since its independence, India has been associated with non-alignment, championed by Jawaharlal Nehru, which enabled it to avoid bipolar entrapment and prioritized moral sovereignty amid decolonization struggles. Eventually, recalibration of Indian foreign policy happened, and multi-alignment was inculcated, keeping in mind the newer geopolitical realities and domestic needs, and keeping the core principle of independent decision-making intact. The end of bipolarity, 1991, at the global level gave way to unipolarity under U.S. hegemony, with the U.S. holding an edge in technology, the economy, and the military domain. India, on the other hand, lacked investment and jobs in its otherwise highly potent economy. The Russian Federation, the successor state of the Soviet Union and India's traditional ally, was undergoing an internal political and economic upheaval. In this case, it was pragmatic for India to reinforce its ties with the former capitalist bloc to sustain its global political and economic standing and to meet its population's needs and demands. Globalization demanded supply chain resilience beyond Russia. However, given huge military dependencies on Russia, it was not prudent to abandon ties with Russia, considering India's adversarial ties with its immediate neighbors, Pakistan and the People's Republic of China, PRC. This interplay of geopolitical and economic factors led to a shift in India's stance from non-alignment to strategic autonomy, in which its agency was sought to be maintained without giving up ties with traditional allies, thus preventing overdependence. The evolution from non-alignment to multi-alignment and exercise of strategic autonomy enhanced India's bargaining power and helped it in its gradual defense indigenization, also fostering economic resilience. The multilateral forums like Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, between India, Australia, the US and Japan, aimed at promoting a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region, often viewed as a diplomatic, economic and security counterweight to the PRC's rising influence, showcased the evolution of India's doctrine from non-alignment to multi-alignment. Strategic autonomy enabled India's post-1991 economic ascent by facilitating multi-alignment, attracting FDI from diverse sources like the European Union, the US and Japan, while sustaining ties with Russia for energy security and defense needs. These diversified partnerships contributed to a boost in GDP growth from 5.6% to 7+% averages, with a gradual 20-fold rise in defense exports through indigenization. India's strategic autonomy confronts existential threats from multipolar coercion, technological choke points, and border escalations. Any economic sanction from the US on the basis of India's ties with Russia risks financial isolation, while the PRC salami slicing on the line of actual control, LAC, and Malaccan dominance threatens 70% of global trade flows. Thus, India's framework of strategic autonomy and multi-alignment maximized its agency in a post-Cold War world order, avoiding Thucydides' traps while shaping rules, for instance, COP21 and the G20 debt framework. India's evolved foreign policy stance from non-alignment to multi-alignment and strategic autonomy signified autonomy without isolation, as optimal in fragmented orders, although sustainability rests on internal balancing. Vietnam's asymmetrical strategic autonomy. Vietnam's geopolitical context is substantially different from that of India. Being a small state in geographic terms and having a difficult relationship with the PRC, which is much larger in geographic, economic, and strategic terms, Vietnam operates in a highly asymmetric strategic environment. Although it has to be taken into cognizance that, despite such a convoluted strategic scenario, Vietnam has developed a sophisticated strategy of autonomy that pivots on diversification and diplomatic balance. Scholars of international studies based globally as well as in Vietnam have described Vietnam's foreign policy as bamboo diplomacy, signifying flexibility as well as resilience, the character of a bamboo. Hanoi maintains a comprehensive strategic partnership with the PRC while strengthening its ties with the US, Japan, India, Russia, and the European Union. Vietnam adopted strategic autonomy post-Doi Moi, 1986, to navigate US-PRC rivalry in the South China Sea, where 90% of its trade transits contested waters. Formulated by General Secretary Nguyen Phu Trong in 2016 and codified in the 2019 Defense White Papers, 4 no's, no alliances, no siding with one country against another, no foreign bases, no use of force, it balances relations with the US, China, Russia, Japan, India and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, while prioritizing sovereignty over the South China Sea. where China claims 90% of Vietnam's exclusive economic zone, EEZ. This approach allows Vietnam to hedge against the PRC without confronting Chinese assertiveness in the South China Sea militarily, thereby exercising agency and avoiding overdependence on any one power. The policy of strategic autonomy has accrued Vietnam robust growth and diplomatic elevation, as reflected by the U.S. Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, 2023, and defense diversification, wherein Vietnam has received BrahMos missiles from India and a surveillance satellite system from Israel. Also, on the defense and economy part, modernization has occurred in Vietnam through its diversified procurement by expanding its outreach to suppliers other than Russia. Hanoi has also pursued trade integration, becoming part of multiple free trade agreements, for instance, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, and the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. This diversification has enhanced the resilience of Vietnam's economy and its over-reliance on a single market. However, being a single-party system with its own constraints and critical dependencies on the PRC, Vietnam's strategic space is limited, making its geopolitical context complex. Vietnam aims to reach upper-middle income status by 2030 and high-income status by 2045 through its supermodel growth, positioning itself as ASEAN's semiconductor hub and logistics powerhouse, rivaling Thailand. Diplomatically, it seeks South China Sea Code of Conduct leadership, an Indo-Pacific balancer role, and Global South amplification through ASEAN and the United Nations. Thus, it illustrates that strategic autonomy is not reserved for substantial or large powers alone, rather, small states, in terms of geography and economy, can also exercise autonomy through a calibrated diplomatic approach and diversified economic and strategic partnerships. The case of Vietnam demonstrates that calibrated diversification turns geopolitical vulnerabilities into assets, enabling regional influence through resilient, principled hedging. Strategic autonomy has emerged as one of the crucial frameworks of employing statecraft in the countries of the Global South. Although it is rooted in the relics of Cold War non-alignment, it is now far from it and comprises strategies such as diversification, resilience, and agency, among others. The cases of India and Vietnam illustrate that while autonomy takes different forms, the foundational basis remains consistent, preserving the ability to decide autonomously in an increasingly constrained international system. This principle has helped the Global South states to preserve their agency and protect their sovereignty amid the disorder erupting time and again in the international system. It has also enhanced the economies of Global South countries, improving the standard of living of their people, pulling them out of poverty, and transforming the economic situation of the Global South to a significant extent. With changes in the global political order, the concept of strategic autonomy is destined to evolve into a more critical tool, especially for middle and developing powers. Now, whether it culminates in a lasting influence is debatable, but it has certainly contributed to the diplomatic and strategic toolkit of middle and rising powers in international politics. Author, Kaustubh Tripathi, research interest lies in Russia-China relations, Eurasian geopolitics, and security issues. The views contained in this article are the author's alone and do not represent the views of the University of Delhi.
This was the Horizon Audiofiles, a podcast of the Defense Horizon Journal. For more information, go to www.tdhj.org. Thank you for listening.